right, Joshua, hit it.
Alan Freed.
Say again?
Alan Freed.
Yes. Alan Freed. He's dead. Dead now.
Found in a gutter.
What?
Found in a gutter.
Found in a gutter. Yeah, that's his claim to fame. No, his claim to fame is naming rock and roll. His shame to fame is what's the scandal?
That's the one that got burned.
Charging people to play their songs on the radio.
Payola is the word, but you're right. Yeah, he had no life. He couldn't get work anywhere and became a drummer. All right, just listen first to that. So the overall umbrella word for all of the music we're going to talk about tonight and into next week is jazz. Jazz is the first original American art form. You know, we're still a relatively new country. We're whatever, 250-ish, 240 some years old. And jazz is kind of a combination of African influences, which I'd say is probably the heaviest. If you're making it as a recipe, that would be the most amount you put in there. And then Native American, which we used to call Indian. But India is a country, and the people from India are Indians, and they also, people of Native American heritage also say that Indian's a negative word for them. So politically correct, you say Native American. And I do go on tangents, or off on tangents, so I apologize. Why were they ever called Indians? Anybody know? Anybody got any Native American blood in them that they know of? Because it's a really great thing to check that off on a box if you're applying for school or grants or something. 'Cause if you have, I mean, that's really worth something if you got a certain percentage, so that's pretty cool. Anybody know why they were referred to as Indians?
Wasn't it because of their skin color?
No?
Christopher Columbus thought he was in India.
Wow, good for you. This guy that we
yeah.
give a holiday to. In my Methodist church, where I no longer work, they don't list Veterans Day as a recognized holiday for the office staff, but they recognize Columbus Day.
Wow.
Christopher Columbus was Italian, sent by Queen Isabella of Spain to go find India. And he got lost. And he came to America and he thought he was in the West Indies. So the people he thought that he first discovered would be called Indians because he was sure he was there. And this is an Italian sent from Spain who got lost and discovered nothing. Just landed at land that already existed with people living. And he gets a national holiday. Here. So I never have quite understood that. But that's my tangent for tonight. But Native American, some Hispanic in there too, and the common unifying theme is percussion. In any African music I can play for you, drums, drums, drums. In Native American music, and I'm going to play a little bit, drums, drums, drums. Another characteristic of jazz is that the notes are not always hit right on the button, right on the middle, ta, 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 ta. You slide into them from below or you slide in from above. Yeah, and you're going to hear Native American. This is called a field holler. This is the type of thing that Native Americans, or in this case, let me see if this is. This is actually slaves. This is African slaves, but it's a similar sound. Field holler. Quiet, Tamara. I know, it's a joke, don't worry. And this is a father's field call. Falsetto. Slave singing falsetto. This is just labeled complaint call.
Oh, the time don't get no better here. I'm going down the road.
when slaves worked, it's kind of the one thing that Whitey gave them was singing. Because just like the 3 examples I discussed in research that you didn't see on the tape, it increased the workers' productivity if they all sang songs together while they worked. It certainly for them made them be able to tolerate, you know, a 10-hour slave working day.
Is that what they got that song, been working on the railroads all day or something?
Pretty much. It's a very similar thing, and you're gonna, that's the next example, but without, it's not the same exact. But when they all were like, let's say, building a railroad and having to hammer the spikes, if you do it in unison to a song, you're gonna go faster and work better. The next one's actually called Hammer Ring.
Won't you ring, oh hammer, hammer, ring. Won't you ring, oh hammer, hammer, ring. Broke the hammer, 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 ring. Broke the hammer and the hammer, hammer, ring. Got the hammer in the Bible, hammer, ring. Got the hammer in the Bible, hammer, ring. Won't you ring, oh hammer, hammer, ring.
But what, you know, in many workplaces, there's always music playing. It just makes it a little more tolerable. In offices, there's music. There's a whole company called Muzak, M-U-Z-A-K, I guess. And it's office music and elevators. And there's as much study goes on with what music will make American workers work better and longer and bitch less. You know, what will enhance the office or the warehouse environment better. But it's apparently not heavy metal or hip hop. Let's go to the next one. Oh, now we're into the really first official thing that I'm going to call jazz. Just like rock has kind of these subcategories, the first form of music that we call jazz, and let me write the word just so you got it there. A subcategory of jazz is called ragtime.
Scott Joplin.
Don't get ahead of me, Reggie. I want to backpedal on Hammer Ring. Since they were given the ability, the gift of music, because it increased their productivity, one of the things that the slaves, the African American slaves, did is they started making up a language, kind of a slave language. And again, boss man didn't mind it because it made them work faster and better. And it turns out they developed a code language, and it just sounded like crazy singing. You know, the boss man would go back and say, "Did you hear that crazy singing they were doing it?" Well, they had developed a code. You know, if they were going to be escaping or doing something with the Underground Railroad and getting people out, they would be telling it in this working in the fields special code, which kind of translated eventually into what is done in jazz called scat singing, which we'll get to in a second. I think that's really, really interesting, you know, that they did that. So Reggie mentioned it. Ragtime is called that because the time, the rhythm, is a little bit jumpy. It's all over the place. It was said, wow, the time or the rhythm's a little ragged. That's ragged time you're playing in, ragtime. And the composer, the only composer we will associate with that is Scott Joplin. One of the great, and I'm going to say this wrong, but I'll say it both ways, one of the great African American composers. But equally so, one of the great American composers. I want you to know he's African American because it's important, but I don't want to say, considering he's an African American, he's a great musician, great composer. Died way, 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 way too early from syphilis, because they just didn't have the antibiotic power in those days that they do today. There may be a song or two that you'll recognize. There's a movie that I would beg all of you to watch. I'm writing it down. It's not going to be on the test, but I want you to take it seriously. If you're ever looking for a crazy, great movie to watch. Again, this is not for testing purposes. Paul Newman Your mom or grandma will tell you that Paul Newman's hot. Probably your grandma will say Paul Newman's hot, and your mom will say Robert Redford was hot. I just like his initials. First name is cool too. The entire sound score came out in '73, I want to say. Entire sound score is the music of Scott Joplin. It's set kind of in the 1920s. Ragtime was probably a little earlier than that, so it doesn't match up exactly, but the music works so great. And when you watch the movie, you get to see a lot of period costumes and cars and really cool stuff. And it's about con men. A sting, the word sting as in like you go outside and one of you distracts a guy while another one plays a trick on the wife and takes the money out of the pocketbook kind of a thing. That's the sting. But it's con men conning con men because one gets killed by another gang, so to speak, and then it's the others trying to get back at them through these series of just unbelievably complicated, but pretty funny. But I will, I'm not giving you a spoiler, so I don't need an alert, but when bad guys are heroes in movies, they don't always live.
Aww.
Okay, so be ready for not everything turning out like a Disney movie. Okay? So let's listen. This is a piano piece. Ragtime was originally written for the piano. That's important. Anyone ever heard of Marvin Hamlish? He just died recently.
He's in How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
Say it again?
He's in How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
Nope.
Yeah, he is. He plays the piano.
Oh, it's just a cameo type thing?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
pretty much.
How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
Yeah, he has a real small part in it.
Yeah. He's on
Yeah.
one.
And who else?
Yeah, Kate Hudson and Matthew McConaughey.
Okay. He was a great pianist, great composer, wrote all the great songs for Barbra Streisand. At the last Oscars, they did like a 7-minute tribute to him where she actually came out and sang, and she hasn't sung on TV in 30 years. She has stage fright. And so she's sung about 5 concerts in her last 20 years and gotten $3 million each time because she's basically saying, if I'm going to go out there, it better be worth my while because it's really hard for me to do that. Memory likes the corners of my mind, misty watercolored memories of the way we were. Nobody knows that anymore except the old people. Wow. He wasn't such a nice guy. I put him in the same category, by the way, as Diana Ross.
Wow.
He would be the second biggest in show business. I first heard about him when the reason I bring him up is he arranged all of Joplin's music for the Sting. He would go on the talk shows and say, oh yeah, I wrote all this great music, you're going to love it. And they'd go, well, listen to really Scott Joplin. Yeah, well, I mean, I wrote it. He'd almost discount this incredible composer. He just arranged it for orchestra. Scott Joplin wrote this incredible music. But my sister plays string bass professionally. She's 4 years older than I am. Plays in the Louisville Symphony Orchestra. And Marvin Hamlish came in to play a Pops concert with them in the early 1980s when he was huge. And he was kind of a jerk to them, just wasn't nice at all. And at the end of the last concert, he's in the hall heading towards his limo, and they're sort of, getting back to the locker room. He goes, oh, orchestra, great to be here. Thanks so much for your hospitality. Listen, I put a bottle of wine for all of you in the dressing room. And there's 80 in an orchestra. They literally thought they were each going to get to their locker, and there'd be a bottle of wine.
Right.
They get there, and there's a wooden stool and a bottle of wine.
Wow.
And 80 little communion cups.
Wow.
And that was his way of, kind of like people say if a waitress is bad, don't not tip, because then she thinks you forgot. Leave like 7 cents so she knows you gave a really low tip, or he is, a server too. Maybe you don't know what waitress is, that's old-fashioned words too. Server, what's it called? So he was intentionally saying, 80 of you get to split this one bottle of $2 Chuck or whatever it would be, you know, a $4 bottle, I don't know. And then I worked with him, and he was really rough on us too. Very big ego. Anyway, here is probably the second most famous song by Scott Joplin. This is a piano piece called The Maple Leaf Rag. And you'll hear how the rhythm jumps all over the place. Ragged Time. Anyone ever heard that?
Yes.
I can't play it without telling a true life story. 2 churches ago, when I was choir director in Brandon at the First Presbyterian Church, there was a guy that was probably in his mid to late 80s. And he came up to me after about 3 years and said, I love the choir. I love what you're doing. I've never been able to really sing. I've never been in a choir. We didn't have the term bucket list in those days, but that's what he was essentially saying. Before I die, I want to sing in a church choir. And I'm not in a church from the, you got to audition, you got to go to read music school. I'm from the, if you have a desire to make a joyful noise, you just pass the audition. You're in, and I'll make it work. If you stick out like a sore thumb, the Lord don't care. Now, I'll try to quiet you down, but I'm okay with it. And if people out there got a problem, they got to talk to somebody that's not called me. You know? So he started singing. I mean, he's old. I got him a special large print edition of the Presbyterian hymnal so he could, you know, see the words and stuff. And then after like 6 months, you know, he wasn't there a couple times, and I saw his wife in church, and she said, yeah, he's sick, first stages of Alzheimer's. And he's actually, she's very old and couldn't take care of him, so they had already moved him to a facility. So again, this story, I think, tells you so much about what music does in my life and why I know it's so special. Those other research things are great examples too, but this one really hits home. So I went to visit him. I'm his choir director, you know, and I'm a quasi-minister in the church, so it was in Brandon. I went by, and I called ahead. They were expecting me, and when I got there, it was like, oh, Robert's here. The guy's name was Bob. They go, Robert's here. Bob's music guy's here, everybody. And it's like, I'm a celebrity, but I wasn't really. They were just excited I was there because they wanted me to meet Joe, not Bob, my guy. They said, go get Joe, not you. And I want to see Bob. Well, I go in Bob's room and I sit down and I can't really tell if he knows me. You know, he seems to be okay at the moment. And then it's time to, you know, get up, and he wants to walk out, and I walk out, and coming down the hall are 2 aides and this guy Joe, who, if I knew that they wouldn't be carrying a dead guy, I'd have thought they were carrying a dead guy. This guy was, you know, folded up, fetal position, you know, just barely walking, and they were carrying him, and just didn't look like he had any life in him. And then they get him up to me, and they go, Joe, this is Robert, Bob's music guy we told you about. And they took out his hand and made him shake my hand, and I couldn't really feel any humanity there at all. But I'm happy to meet you, Joe. Great. And they go, follow us, Robert. And I follow them into the cafeteria, where up against the wall is an upright piano. And they go, you won't believe this. And they sit Joe down on the piano. And he already, just feeling that bench on his bum, starts coming alive a little bit. They lift the lid, they take his hands, and he touches the black and whites. And he went from a fetal position to like a 25-year-old, incredibly healthy man.
Wow.
And he played the song I just played for you,
Wow.
The Maple Leaf Rag, from beginning to end. Did he play it perfectly? No. Did he play it? Yes.
Wow.
Much more better than if it was perfect. From beginning to end, he played Maple Leaf Rag. There's something about music. This is a guy who might be dead tomorrow. Can't tie his shoes, can't feed himself. But when he has that kinesthetic feeling of those keys and starts playing, it's like, oh my gee. And it was incredible. And it was a Maple Leaf Rag.
Wow.
It's just the coolest thing. The other song that Scott Joplin wrote that's probably more popular is the theme from the movie The Sting. Anyone seen The Sting that you know of?
I've seen it.
I saw it when I was really, really young. It's one of my mom's favorite movies.
It has nothing to do with the band The Police or anything like that.
Right.
It's called The Entertainer.
Yeah.
Piano initially, then the band comes in. You gotta watch this one. Yeah. We heard two Scott Joplin songs. The one that you need to be in your notes is Maple Leaf Rag. The question will be, to what song of Scott Joplin did we listen in class? The correct answer for the test is Maple Leaf Rag. Tom!
That song we just heard, is that common for everybody else to be the ice cream man or ice cream truck? Or is it just me?
Oh, have other people heard The Entertainer as the ice cream song?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you hear them, they have a brother right. Yeah.
I don't know that I recall
They
that.
sure do.
In my neighborhood, the ice cream truck is so dirty, and the man driving it looks so much like a pedophile that I wouldn't let my kids go within 50 feet of that truck. It is the scariest thing. And that's just on videotape. Thank you very much, ice cream. All right, we're done. Signing off.
But he's right though.
Kill it.
Ice cream